Matt Lawton, because he's on the phone now. Matt, good morning to you.
Good morning.
So, this report and these stories have been so long in gestation that I guess anybody who's been covering it in the way that you have, this is a moment that you knew was coming, but it's always good to see it down in cold black and white print from the Select Committee that your story was right all along and now has been vindicated to the high heavens, effectively.
Yeah, it does feel a bit like that, and also the stories on Coe and Farah, which I've covered. They've managed to wrap up 2 years of my life in 52 pages. So, there is a sense of vindication, but I guess we need to see what happens now. We need to see what impact this has on Sky, if it has any kind of impact on Brailsford. I'm not convinced it will do. There's a sort of, I don't know. There's a lot of heads being buried in sand, it feels to me. But we'll see what happens.
I guess the other thing is that it doesn't feel like an end. It feels like this is a midpoint here, because there's the investigation into the testosterone patches.
Yeah.
There's the fact that a couple of key witnesses haven't really fully been interviewed properly. Dr. Freeman in particular, I'm thinking of in that one. And then there's just a few bits of evidence that have now been written down for the very first time that once you start to unpack them, you think, oh, hang on a second, if Bradley was sorted, as it says here, did his TUE apply or did he not need a TUE? Maybe that wasn't Flumicil in the jiffy bag after all.
Yeah, I certainly don't think it's the end. You're absolutely right. The GMC investigation into Freeman and the testosterone patches, I think, is massive. And you always think there's going to be a tipping point. You know, I must admit, when I first wrote about Brailsford's attempts to kill the jiffy bag story, I kind of thought that might be the tipping point, but it wasn't. And then other things have happened. Chris Froome's failed drugs test, you think, is at the tipping point? Not yet, but I do wonder if he actually does get banned, whether that becomes a tipping point. But the testosterone patches story, you probably saw last week, I did a story of, we believe that the GMC have obtained some further evidence on that, which could be extremely significant. So, you look at Dave Brailsford and the blows keep coming in, and the image of the team keeps getting damaged, and you just wonder when Sky, Sky Corporate, Sky the company, say enough is enough, when the people like Jeremy Darroch and James Murdoch say we can't take any more of this, or when the sponsors who pump all this money in to run this team say we can't take any more of this. I think I read a piece in The Guardian this morning saying there's no credibility left, and I think that's the tone of pieces I've read in the Times, on our pages. You just wonder how they keep going, but they haven't. If they deserve any lasting aberration, it's their kind of, it's the thickness of their hide, if you like. They are amazingly resilient.
The remarkable thing about the whole Wiggins story has been this kind of onus that's been placed on Dr. Richard Freeman, and potentially he's been happy to take that flack, that it's like, oh, look at this doctor who couldn't keep records on his computer, which ended up getting stolen anyway, and that's the reason why this has become a total mess. And they have this whistleblower that's unnamed in the report this morning saying that Dave Brailsford and Shane Sutton put more pressure on Freeman to provide more proactive medical support, which is the first thing we have on the record, really, isn't it, Matt, of Brailsford and Sutton pressurising Freeman and backing him into corners, potentially?
Yeah. We do, although on the record from an anonymous whistleblower. And it's funny, I read that, and I actually don't know who that is. And I think I'm pretty across this story, but I don't know who the whistleblower is. I've got an idea, but I don't know. The idea that they didn't know what the doctors were doing, and it was all, the way that sort of Brailsford tried to present it in Parliament all those months ago is slightly difficult to believe. I actually think the biggest thing in that report is the admission by Sutton that the use of triamcinolone was unethical. I thought that was the absolute standout quote of the whole report. I thought it was incredible, and from what I understand, people at Sky are shaken by that, because what you have the man who masterminded Wiggins' success, coached him to that tour title, took him from a guy that was going out the back door and finished 24th in his first year at Sky and won it in 2012. And he's also Brailsford's right-hand man. That nothing happened at Team Sky without those two people knowing, and one of them has broken ranks talking to the committee and has admitted that it was unethical. And I actually think, Wiggins put out his statement last night. He will not be able to escape what his coach and mentor has said. Read the Wiggins book in 2012, My Time. Shane Sutton is a central player in the story. He is someone that Wiggins describes as absolutely crucial to his success. And he is now conceding that, yes, it is unethical. It might not have broken any wider rules technically, but it's unethical. And given that the ethics of the team is kind of central to their image, central to what they're supposed to be about, central to the dream that Brailsford sold everybody in 2010, I think that kills them. I don't think they can escape that. It's in black and white. It's in a parliamentary report. And they will just keep getting hit with that. It'll be, well, your coach said it was unethical, or your right-hand man said it was unethical. And I think that will drag them down eventually. But as I say, let's see how resilient they remain. Just
on the point about not technically having broken any water rules, there is a possibility, though, that if Shane Sutton, if Dr. Freeman decides at some point in the future to confirm what was in the jiffy bag, that on the day that whatever was in that jiffy bag was administered to Bradley Wiggins, that if it was the corticosteroid, then he would have broken water rules.
Yeah, he would have done. Yeah,
and that's why that story is actually so important.
Of course it is. Yeah, that's why I pursued it. That's why when I was told a story about a package being delivered, that's exactly why I pursued it, because the allegation was that an ADRV had been, an anti-doping rule violation had been committed, and while it was difficult to, it was potentially difficult to take it anywhere if everyone just flatly denied it. So I don't know what you're talking about, and none of the facts of what I'd been given stood up. It was the way that they went into meltdown when I started asking questions. It was the way Brailsford tried to stop me running the story that made me think, my God, there's actually something in this. So yes, that is incredibly important. Of course it is, and I actually think. See, we've been quite strong in our coverage this morning. We've used some quite strong words. But the other question is, and of course, Wiggins will have medical certificates, they have the submissions of a chest position to support this. But is obtaining a TUE, this is the big question, is obtaining a TUE when there isn't a medical need an ADRV? I think it probably is.
Well, I mean, by WADA's own rules, it says it is. Like, the whole point about a TUE is that it's not supposed to give you an unfair advantage, and you're definitely not supposed to take it if you don't have a medical issue, and you're definitely not supposed to take it if it's just to cover up something that you've been taking out of competition. Yeah. And on all three cases, according to the report today, Sky have failed.
Yeah, and the thing is that is what the MPs have accused them of. And now they are protected by parliamentary privilege. They have gone further than anyone has dared go, because they have that parliamentary privilege. They have that legal protection. But if we focus today on what we can absolutely attack them on, I still come back to the admission that it's unethical, and that for me is big, and that for me is the big problem they have today. The other stuff may or may not follow. The Freeman situation is fascinating. You said just now that maybe he's happy to take it. I don't think he is happy to take it. I think his life has been ruined. He's got a very serious situation here with the GMC. He hasn't worked since. He's under, from what I understand, immense stress. Is suffering medically as a result of that. So he's far from happy. And the day that he does actually speak will be fascinating, because presumably he knows an awful lot, and how ethical their use of triamcinolone is something he can shed a lot of light on. It's we'll go back to the start. This is far from over. This is just the next step. But I do applaud Collins and the committee for the tone of their report, the courage of their report. Because I know as a journalist that when you're asking the tough questions of people like Seb Coe, Mo Farah, Bradley Wiggins, Dave Brailsford, these people are national heroes. It's not easy, and I applaud them for what they've done. It's a great piece of work.
I suspect that the way Team Sky have handled the story since the Jiffy bag in late 2015 is almost like the classic duck analogy, that what we actually see is very different to what's actually going on under the water. And you will have seen what was going on under the water. And I wonder, could you explain to us a little bit further in terms of Dave Brailsford's dealings with you specifically, with the media, and, as you said earlier on, how he tried to kill the Jiffy bag story?
Yeah, well, look, it's well documented now. There were. I was presented with different versions of events as to what happened. I was told that Simon Cope, the guy who took the package, wasn't in France to deliver a package. He was there to meet Emma Pooley, the female cyclist, an alibi which exploded in his face when I realised that Emma Pooley wasn't even in France. She was in Spain. They then said that this possible scenario of medication being administered on the back of the bus, something that Shane Sutton essentially confirmed in the parliamentary hearing when he said that the doctor had told him, Freeman had told him that Brad was sorted before they all left before they all left La Tuisière, but he said the bus had already left. That proved to be untrue because of a cycling fan's video that was on YouTube that he clearly wasn't aware of. And then there was the final plea at the end of our meeting, sort of 2-hour meeting, when he basically said, if you didn't run the story, is there anything else we could do? Which I took as a desperate attempt to persuade me to not to run it. Which again just sort of said to me, my God, they are so keen for this not to go in. There must be something to this. So yeah, he handled it appallingly. And in fairness to him, he has admitted that, and he actually admitted to me at one stage that I'd done a far better job than he had, because I think he knows how much further damage he inflicted. But I don't really care about that kind of sentiment and that kind of conciliatory tone, because I think there's a much bigger issue here now, and I actually just think that the whole thing is pretty fraudulent. I don't think they are who they say they are. I think the report exposes that, and I think everyone's been a bit conned.
I think the value of a report like this is that it ties together all of the work that you've done and a bunch of other people have done around these stories, and it distills it into an inarguable narrative where we now look at the whole notion of marginal gains, and we're better at science, and we're better at all of our record taking and note taking and understanding aerodynamics and diet and clean pillows and all that kind of stuff, and you realise that is all a bunch of crap, and that the truth is that they were abusing TUEs. We don't know how far back this goes, but it suddenly tarnishes all of the work and all of the career that Brailsford has had and all of the stuff that Bradley Wiggins has achieved either side of the bit that is in question here. And it continues to raise serious questions about what Team Sky are doing up to this point, notwithstanding we haven't even really spoken about what Chris Froome is doing.
Yeah, and to be honest, what we mustn't forget is I agree with what you just said, but what we mustn't forget actually, that I kind of think they were a busted flush from the moment the Fancy Bear stuff came out. From the moment we saw that Brad had applied for TUEs before the 2012 tour, before the 2011 tour, and before the 2013 Giro to use triamcinolone. A drug that so many specialists have come forward and basically said is completely over the top, completely unnecessary to deal with allergies and asthma. And it's I did the ETAP. I'm a crap amateur cyclist, but I did the ETAP with a load of doctors last summer, and we were all just sat around in the French Alps talking about it, and there must have been 7 doctors in the room. You know, they're all consultants in different areas, but not, you know, to a man, they just said it was ridiculous to prescribe triamcinolone for his condition. And you just listen to that, and you listen to people like John Dickinson down at the University of Kent, who's a respiratory expert and actually manages the asthma symptoms of quite a few British Olympic athletes, and they just say this is bonkers. You don't need it, and that comes back to what the report is about: medical need versus performance enhancement. And their conclusion is it was about performance enhancement, and I think that's what any sane person can see as well. And it's, you know what, it's actually really depressing, but really important. And you know, I sort of, you know, I'm quite sort of proud of the coverage in the media today, the papers. You know, it's even the front page of the Sun. You know, it's the front page lead in the Sun on a Monday morning. You know, and you just think, wow, you know, that's people care about this stuff.
They do, because sport is supposed to matter, and you're supposed to be able to believe what you see. But I guess I was saying earlier that, like, it's not similar to what Lance Armstrong did, and yet the scale of what Team Sky have achieved is reaching that point of Armstrong dominance. If you combine Bradley Wiggins' career with the career of Chris Froome, what Team Sky have achieved in cycling isn't a million miles away from what US Postal were able to do, and we know exactly how US Postal were doing that now. So, like, the entire sport, I think it's actually a really good day for cycling. I did just want to briefly mention, because the Nike Oregon project also comes in for a shorter part of this, and Sebastian Coe, Lord Sebastian Coe, comes out of this awfully today. Now, obviously, Team Sky is going to be the main lead today, but their lawyers and their communications teams are going to be very busy over the next couple of days. Yeah,
like the Coe thing was a story that I worked on actually in tandem with BBC Panorama guys, and it centres around an email that Dave Bedford sent. Dave Bedford became aware that he got approached by Shubakova's people, who told him that basically they were being extorted for money, or had been extorted for money by the DX to conceal her positive drugs test. $500,000, I think, was the figure off the top of my head. And Bedford was a little concerned that there'd apparently been very little response to this. I think we know why now. Because basically the IAAF was rotten to the core at that time under the DIAC administration, and he did what seemed a perfectly sensible thing and thought, well, I'm going to go to the IAAF vice president I know, who I think is a good guy, and alert him to what's going on. He sent an email detailing the Shubakova situation to Seb Coe. Seb Coe then spoke to Parliament in one of their many hearings as part of this report, combating doping in sport, and said that he knew about the situation at the IAAF at a certain time. Bedford's email predated that. I remember being at Euro 2016. It was actually the day of an England game. I forget which fairly awful football match it was, but I was in the press centre before the match, and I rang Coe's spokeswoman and said, right, got an email here from Dave Bedford. This is the date on it, and basically she told me that he hadn't opened it. Now, we do know that Seb is a little 20th century when it comes to modern communication. Doesn't really do text messages, doesn't really do emails. But when an important one comes in, he did at the time, I think, have 2 PAs who would alert him to important stuff. He says he simply forwarded the email to the ethics people at the IAAF without opening it, despite the fact it was from Dave Bedford and it was marked, pretty pretty bloody important, basically. And I always remember Jackie Brock-Doyle, the spokeswoman, saying to me, if he's guilty of anything, it's a lack of curiosity. Now, the committee, as they've kind of expressed in their report, are as sceptical about that as I was, basically. And they've accused him of essentially misleading Parliament that day. So, yeah, it's not a good day for Sedco. He's had other such days like this since he became IAAF president, not least because of his terrible speech that he gave when he became IAAF president, and he described Lamine Diack as the spiritual leader of the organisation, spiritual leader who's now at the centre of a criminal financial investigation in France. And it's another one of those days, and it's, you know, it as the committee said, it kind of highlights the importance of investigative journalism and highlights the issues we still have in international sport in 2018.
One last point. It does really highlight the importance for investigative journalism, but also it highlights that these types of committees can do work that, as you've said, parliamentary privilege applies to this,
Yeah.
so they can actually speak truth to power in situations like this. And it's hopefully a symbiotic relationship, that everybody keeps each other at arm's length enough to be able to kind of make sure that they're doing their work properly, and you know, that it doesn't just become grandstanding for the sake of it, but that ultimately this might be the best way to tackle anti-doping into the future.
Yeah, it's certainly one way. I still think the best way to tackle anti-doping is to give the agencies proper power, you know, and proper funding. You know, UCAD have just had their funding doubled, but it's still less than a championship football team would spend on a new midfielder. You know what I mean? It is nonsense, really. And they're there to protect the credibility of sport, you know, and it's, you know, and they have situations where they actually have to consider the risks of taking on a major sports star who actually has more income than they do, has more millions in the bank than they do, and can send in the big shot lawyers. You know, this is part of the problem. This is part of the challenge. But no, they are very important, and those hearings were incredibly important. And what they did was they really did put people under pressure, because even though they have no real power, even though the last person to get, I think the last time someone was imprisoned for contempt of Parliament was 1666. I don't think it was linked to the Great Fire, but it was the same year for some reason. And you know, they don't have any power, but when you put these people in that chair in front of 12 inquisitive MPs, they do struggle. And we had some amazing moments over the last 16 months. You know, we had you know, Simon Cope being the most memorable one. You know, when they realised that he even had two sets of expenses. So did he drive to Gatwick Airport, or did he get the train? Because he'd actually charged the national governing body for both. And the guy sits there in a room full of MPs and said, "Well, we all fiddle our expenses, don't we?" You know, it's just some incredible moments. You know, fascinating to cover as a journalist, but really important. And I actually think that committee has really served an important purpose, as we've seen today.
Yeah, no, for sure. Matt, great stuff, and in fairness, your work the whole way along has been brilliant, and you've always been great with your time with us as well, so thanks very much for making the time for us today.
Yeah.